The people who change your life rarely arrive with an introduction. Sometimes they arrive soaking wet, carrying nothing but silence. Ethan Brooks had spent nearly a decade believing that ordinary days were life's greatest blessing. At 39 years old, the white American single father had learned to measure success differently than most people. It was not found in expensive homes or impressive titles. It was found in packing his 8-year-old daughter Lily's school lunch before sunrise, fixing another customer's pickup truck with honest hands, and watching the porch light welcome them home every evening in the quiet Montana valley they loved. Their modest farmhouse stood beside a small repair garage surrounded by towering pine trees and endless fields that glowed golden every autumn afternoon. The business paid the bills most months, although never by much, and Ethan had long ago accepted that there were richer ways to live than collecting money. On one unusually cold October evening, dark clouds swallowed the mountains long before sunset. Rain swept across the valley with surprising force, bending tree branches and rattling the old farmhouse windows while thunder echoed through the hills. Ethan had just finished washing the dinner dishes after Lily carried her homework upstairs when the electricity flickered once before settling again. He glanced toward the weathered clock hanging above the kitchen doorway. Almost 8 o'clock. Nobody visited this far outside town after dark, especially during a storm like this. Then came 3 slow knocks against the front door. They were hesitant, almost uncertain, as though the person outside expected rejection before hearing an answer. Ethan quietly walked toward the entrance, unlocked the old wooden door, and pulled it open. Cold wind rushed inside, carrying rain and the scent of wet pine. Standing beneath the porch light was a woman in her mid-30s wearing a soaked beige wool coat that clung heavily to her shoulders. Long blonde hair framed an elegant face marked by exhaustion rather than fear, and striking blue eyes searched his with the quiet hope of someone who had spent far too long pretending to be. Stronger than she truly felt. She held only a small leather travel bag, and despite the obvious quality of her clothing, there was nothing proud or demanding about her presence. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said softly. "My car stopped several miles back. I only need somewhere warm until morning." Before Ethan could answer, distant headlights slowly appeared through the curtain of rain. 3 black sport utility vehicles rolled to a stop along the gravel road several hundred feet from the farmhouse without approaching any closer. Their engines continued idling, as if patiently waiting for something to happen. The woman instinctively turned toward them, and for one brief moment the calm expression she had tried so hard to maintain disappeared. Ethan noticed the fear hidden behind her eyes, but he did not ask who she was or why those vehicles had followed her into the middle of nowhere. Raising Lily alone had taught him that everyone carried burdens invisible to strangers, and compassion rarely began with questions. He simply reached for the blue knitted blanket hanging beside the doorway, wrapped it gently around her shoulders, and stepped aside. "Nobody should face a Montana storm alone," he said with quiet kindness. "Come inside before you freeze." The woman hesitated only long enough to whisper, "Thank you." She crossed the threshold, and Ethan quietly closed the door behind her. Outside, rain continued falling against the roof while the waiting vehicles remained motionless beyond the darkness. Inside, the warmth of the farmhouse, the smell of homemade chicken soup still lingering in the kitchen, and the soft glow of a single porch light created something far more powerful than luxury. They created a place where one stranger was finally allowed to stop running, even if only for one ordinary night. The storm slowly drifted east before dawn, leaving behind clean mountain air and a silence that only rural Montana could offer after a long night of rain. Ethan woke before the first light touched the pine trees, following the routine that had shaped nearly every morning since becoming both father and mother to Lily. Fresh coffee filled the farmhouse with its familiar aroma, while bacon sizzled softly in the cast-iron skillet beside a pan of scrambled eggs. The quiet rhythm of ordinary life never asked whether yesterday had been difficult. It simply invited another chance to begin again. Claire stepped carefully into the kitchen, wearing one of Lily's oversized sweaters that Ethan had found folded away in a closet. Her blonde hair was still damp from a warm shower, and although exhaustion remained in her blue eyes, the tension across her face had softened in ways she had not noticed herself. She paused for a moment, almost surprised by the peaceful scene before her. Ethan looked up from the stove with an easy smile. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." Claire nodded gently. "Better than I have in a very long time." Ethan poured another cup of coffee and placed it beside her without asking how she liked it. Somehow, kindness always seemed to know what questions could wait. A few moments later, Lily came running downstairs carrying her backpack almost as large as she was. She stopped when she saw Claire sitting at the kitchen table and smiled without hesitation. "Good morning," Lily said brightly. "Dad makes pancakes on Saturdays, but today is Thursday, so you only get eggs." Ethan laughed quietly while Claire found herself laughing with them before she even realized it. It felt strangely unfamiliar. In boardrooms, laughter was usually measured, polite, and calculated. Here it arrived naturally, as effortless as the morning sunlight slowly filling the windows. During breakfast, nobody asked Claire where she had come from or what had brought her to such an isolated valley. Instead, Lily proudly described her science project about Montana wildlife, while Ethan reminded her to bring her jacket because temperatures would barely reach 50 degrees that afternoon. Claire listened more than she spoke, watching the simple conversation unfold with quiet admiration. Every word around the table seemed free from hidden expectations. Nobody wanted anything from anyone. After Ethan drove Lily to school in his aging pickup truck, he invited Claire to see the garage next door while they waited to hear whether a tow truck could reach her abandoned vehicle. The small repair shop smelled of motor oil, fresh-cut wood, and warm coffee. Toolboxes were organized with surprising care, customer photographs decorated one wall, and handwritten thank-you notes hung beside old family pictures. Ethan greeted every customer by name, remembering birthdays, children's names, and little details that made people smile. Claire quietly observed everything. She noticed that invoices were stacked in uneven piles, appointments were written on scraps of paper, and supplies were reordered only when shelves became nearly empty. The business survived because of Ethan's honesty, not because of efficient management. "You have something special here," Claire said softly after the last customer left. Ethan wiped his hands with an old shop towel and smiled. "It is nothing fancy, but it keeps food on the table." Claire looked around once more before answering. Sometimes the strongest foundations are the ones nobody notices. Ethan simply nodded, never imagining that the woman standing beside him understood billion-dollar operations better than anyone else in America. And Claire quietly realized that the greatest lesson she had found in years was hidden inside a garage that measured wealth by trust instead of numbers. The next few days settled into a rhythm that felt strangely natural, as though Claire had quietly stepped into a life that had been waiting for her all along. Every morning, Ethan opened the garage before 8 o'clock sharp, greeting customers with the same calm smile, whether they arrive in a dusty farm truck or a family sedan that had carried children to school for years. Claire offered to help with small tasks while waiting for replacement parts that would finally allow her abandoned vehicle to be repaired. Ethan handed her a clipboard with a grateful smile, assuming she simply wanted to stay busy. By lunchtime, she had reorganized every pending repair order into neat folders arranged by appointment time, parts availability, and customer priority. She created a simple color-coded system using ordinary office supplies already sitting inside a forgotten drawer. When the afternoon customers arrived, Ethan immediately noticed something unusual. Nobody waited longer than expected. Every repair moved smoothly from inspection to completion. Even the suppliers seemed surprised when Claire politely called ahead to confirm deliveries before problems appeared. Ethan scratched his head with an amused smile. "You have done more in one day than I have managed in 6 months." Claire laughed softly while placing another completed work order onto the counter. Sometimes little changes make the biggest difference. Ethan accepted her answer without asking where she had learned such remarkable organizational skills. He believed people deserved the freedom to share their stories only when they were ready. That quiet respect settled deeply into Claire's heart, because nearly everyone she had ever met wanted something from her before they even knew her name. Here, nobody demanded explanations. That evening, Lily spread her homework across the kitchen table, while Ethan prepared homemade beef stew. Claire joined them, helping with simple math problems before laughing as Lily proudly explained why she believed every grown-up secretly enjoyed coloring books. The sound of their conversation filled the farmhouse with a warmth that expensive homes and private penthouses had never managed to create. Later that night, after Ethan and Lily had gone upstairs, Claire stepped quietly onto the back porch with her cell phone for the first time since arriving in Montana. The cool autumn air carried the scent of pine and freshly cut hay beneath a sky crowded with brilliant stars. She unlocked the phone, stared at dozens of missed calls and hundreds of unread messages, then closed her eyes for a long moment before typing only 3 words. "I'm safe." She pressed send to a single trusted executive before immediately placing the phone back in her coat pocket. No location, no instructions, no promises about returning. Only enough to ease the worries of people who genuinely cared about her well-being. Inside the farmhouse, Ethan noticed the porch light still glowing beneath Claire's shadow through the kitchen window. He considered asking whether everything was all right, but chose instead to quietly place a warm mug of chamomile tea outside the back door before returning upstairs without saying a word. Claire looked down at the steaming cup and smiled to herself. In the corporate world, she had spent years surrounded by assistants, advisors, security teams, and executives who solved complicated problems every hour of every day. Yet none of them had ever thought to leave a simple cup of tea without expecting gratitude in return. As the stars slowly crossed the Montana sky, Claire realized that the life she had always considered small possessed a richness that could never be measured on financial reports. While Ethan remained completely unaware that the woman discovering peace beneath his roof was the missing chief executive officer whose disappearance had quietly become headline news across the country. 3 more peaceful days passed beneath wide Montana skies, and the farmhouse slowly stopped feeling like a temporary shelter for Claire. It began to feel like a place where time moved at the pace of kindness instead of deadlines. Every morning, Ethan unlocked the garage before the sun climbed above the mountains, and every afternoon, Claire quietly found another way to make life a little easier without drawing attention to herself. Customers noticed that appointments ran on time. Suppliers complimented the new organization. Even longtime neighbors joked that Ethan had somehow discovered an extra 8 hours in every day. He only smiled and gave Claire the credit she deserved, although she always brushed away the compliments with quiet humility. Lily enjoyed every moment Claire stayed with them. After school, they baked oatmeal cookies together, read library books beside the fireplace, and laughed while teaching each other card games that usually ended with Ethan pretending to lose just to hear Lily celebrate another victory. Watching them together stirred something inside Claire that she had almost forgotten existed. For years, she had attended elegant charity galas, international conferences, and executive retreats filled with polished conversations. But none of those places had ever given her the simple comfort of sharing homemade cookies around a scratched wooden kitchen table. One cool afternoon, Ethan closed the garage a little early because business had finally slowed. The 3 of them drove into the nearby town for groceries in his aging pickup truck. While Lily searched for her favorite breakfast cereal, Claire wandered toward the magazine aisle. A newspaper displayed near the checkout counter immediately caught her attention. Across the front page was a large photograph she recognized all too well. The headline reported that the chief executive officer of one of the country's largest technology companies had now been missing for nearly a week, leaving investors, employees, and national business leaders searching for answers. Claire quietly folded the newspaper back into place before anyone noticed her expression. She did not want Ethan to see it. She was not ready for the peaceful world she had discovered to disappear beneath the weight of her real identity. As they returned home beneath the golden colors of late autumn, Ethan noticed several unfamiliar black sport utility vehicles parked along a distant ridge overlooking the valley. They remained far enough away to avoid disturbing anyone, yet close enough to remind Claire that the outside world had not stopped searching. Ethan glanced toward the vehicles, then toward Claire, whose eyes lingered on the horizon for only a second before looking away. He could have asked about them. He could have demanded an explanation. Instead, he simply started the pickup truck again after loading the groceries and said with an easy smile, "Looks like more visitors are discovering Montana." Claire smiled softly, grateful that he left the conversation there. That evening, they shared another homemade dinner while soft country music played quietly from an old radio in the corner of the kitchen. Lily talked excitedly about an upcoming school project. Ethan listened with genuine interest, and Claire found herself memorizing every ordinary moment around the table as though her heart already understood they could not last forever. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, she stood alone on the porch wrapped in the familiar blue blanket Ethan had first placed around her shoulders. Beyond the dark fields, the distant headlights of the waiting vehicles appeared once again, no longer hiding behind the trees. They were closer now, patient but unmistakable. Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment, knowing that the peaceful chapter she had unexpectedly found inside one humble farmhouse was quietly approaching its final pages, while Ethan still believed the woman standing beneath his porch light was simply a traveler who had needed a safe place to rest. The following morning arrived with bright blue skies and crisp mountain air, but an unusual stillness settled over the valley before the garage even opened. Ethan raised the large metal door just after 8 o'clock and rolled out the first tool cart of the day, while Claire sorted repair orders at the front counter. Lily had already left for school, waving from the school bus with the same cheerful smile she offered every morning. For a brief moment, everything appeared wonderfully ordinary. Then the sound of several powerful engines echoed across the gravel road. Ethan looked up as 3 black sport utility vehicles slowly entered the property, followed by a sleek executive sedan that reflected the morning sunlight. The vehicles came to a smooth stop without unnecessary noise. Men and women dressed in tailored business suits stepped out with calm professionalism rather than urgency. They looked around respectfully before one distinguished gray-haired gentleman walked toward the garage entrance. His polished shoes collected a thin layer of Montana dust, yet he seemed completely unconcerned. Ethan wiped his hands on a clean shop towel and greeted the visitors with the same friendly smile he offered every customer. "Good morning. Can I help you?" The gentleman stopped a few feet away before quietly turning his attention toward Claire. His composed expression immediately softened with visible relief. "Miss Hayes," he said gently, "we are grateful that you are safe." Every conversation inside the garage seemed to disappear into silence. Claire slowly lowered the clipboard in her hands. She closed her eyes for one brief moment before looking back at Ethan with quiet regret. "I suppose it is time," she whispered. The executives approached respectfully, not one of them speaking over another. A woman carrying a leather portfolio stepped forward. "The board has been waiting for your return, Chief Executive Officer. The company, our employees, and your family have all been deeply concerned." Ethan stood quietly beside an old pickup truck, listening without interruption. His expression never changed. There was no shock, no resentment, and no disappointment. He simply looked at Claire with the same calm kindness he had shown the night she arrived at his door wrapped in cold rain. Claire finally met his eyes. "My full name is Claire Hayes," she said softly. "I led Hayes Technologies in Chicago. I never intended to hide the truth from you. I only wanted a few days where nobody expected anything from me except to sit at the dinner table." Ethan smiled gently as though she had just shared an ordinary detail about herself. "That explains why the paperwork suddenly started making sense," he replied with a quiet laugh. Several executives exchanged surprised glances, clearly expecting anger, confusion, or endless questions. Instead, Ethan glanced toward the farmhouse, then back at Claire. "Have you had lunch yet?" The unexpected question left the entire group speechless. Claire blinked twice before a warm smile slowly appeared across her face, brighter than any expression she had shown since arriving in Montana. "Not yet," she answered honestly. "Then nothing is too urgent for 30 minutes, Ethan said. "There is homemade chicken pot pie in the oven, and nobody should make important decisions on an empty stomach." Even the senior executives smiled at the simple invitation. Around the polished conference tables where Claire usually spent her days, conversations often began with financial forecasts, market reports, and shareholder expectations. Here, the first priority was making certain everyone had something warm to eat. As they walked together toward the farmhouse beneath the clear Montana sky, Claire realized that every title she had earned throughout her career suddenly seemed much smaller than the quiet dignity of the man who had never treated her as a billionaire, a chief executive officer, or a headline. He had simply treated her as someone who deserved kindness. And in that ordinary grace, she had discovered a kind of wealth that no balance sheet could ever record. Claire left Montana the following morning just as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the valley. The black vehicles disappeared down the winding country road, carrying her back toward a world of glass towers, board meetings, and responsibilities that had never stopped waiting. Ethan stood beside Lily near the old wooden fence, raising one quiet hand in farewell. There were no dramatic promises and no grand speeches. Claire simply lowered the window of the executive sedan, smiled with eyes that carried both gratitude and sadness, and held the familiar blue knitted blanket for one last moment before carefully folding it onto her lap. "I will bring this back," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "There is no rush. Some things find their way home when the time is right." The vehicles disappeared beyond the hills, leaving only drifting dust and the peaceful silence that had welcomed Claire days earlier. Life quickly returned to its familiar rhythm. Ethan reopened the garage every morning, greeted neighbors by name, and spent long afternoons repairing engines while Lily finished homework at the small desk inside the office. Nothing about his daily routine changed, because he had never helped Claire expecting anything in return. Yet hundreds of miles away, almost everything inside Hayes Technologies began changing. Claire walked back into the company's headquarters overlooking downtown Chicago without the polished confidence everyone expected. Instead, she carried something quieter. During her first executive meeting, she listened far more than she spoke. She removed several unnecessary approval layers that delayed decisions, expanded employee family leave programs, increased support for mental health resources, and instructed senior leadership to spend time visiting small businesses across the country before proposing new corporate initiatives. "If we cannot understand ordinary families," she calmly told the board, "then we have forgotten who we are building this company to serve." Many executives were surprised by the changes, but they also noticed something remarkable. Employees smiled more often. Customer satisfaction steadily improved. Productivity increased without endless pressure because people felt respected rather than managed. Claire often thought about the little repair garage in Montana, where every customer had been greeted by name instead of an account number. One evening after another successful board meeting, she sat alone inside her office as the Chicago skyline glowed beneath thousands of city lights. Her assistant entered carrying several newspapers and business magazines celebrating the company's renewed leadership. Claire thanked her politely before placing every publication aside, unopened. Instead, she reached into the bottom drawer of her desk and unfolded the blue knitted blanket Ethan had wrapped around her shoulders on that stormy night. The soft wool still carried the faint scent of cedar and fresh mountain air. She smiled quietly, remembering homemade chicken pot pie, Lily's laughter around the kitchen table, and a man who had responded to the revelation of her identity not with admiration for her success, but with concern about whether she had eaten lunch. At that moment, Claire understood that the most valuable leadership lesson she had ever received had not come from a prestigious university, an international conference, or an influential mentor. It had come from a modest farmhouse where kindness was offered freely and dignity never depended upon wealth. She carefully folded the blanket once again before looking out across the endless lights of Chicago. The city still needed her leadership, and she would gladly give it her best. But deep within her heart, she already knew that somewhere beyond those distant skyscrapers stood a small garage beside a quiet farmhouse where success had been redefined forever, and she silently promised herself that when the time was right, She would return not as a chief executive officer seeking refuge, but as a grateful friend coming home. Several weeks passed, and winter quietly surrendered to the first signs of spring. Fresh green grass pushed through the fields surrounding Ethan's farmhouse, while the repair garage became busier as ranchers prepared their trucks and tractors for the new season. Ethan never mentioned Claire's visit unless Lily occasionally asked whether their friend from Chicago was doing all right. His answer was always the same. I believe she's exactly where she needs to be. Life continued with its familiar rhythm, and that was enough for him. One bright Monday morning, the mail carrier stopped beside the garage and handed Ethan a large cream-colored envelope with elegant handwriting across the front. There was no corporate logo on the outside, only his name and address. Curious, he carried it inside before opening it beside the old wooden workbench. Inside was a handwritten letter resting on thick stationery. Ethan immediately recognized Claire's careful handwriting. She thanked him once again for opening his home without asking questions, for treating her like an ordinary person, and for reminding her that respect could never be measured by wealth or position. She explained that the days she spent in Montana had transformed the way she viewed leadership, success, and responsibility. She had recently launched a nationwide initiative to help independently owned family businesses modernize their operations while preserving the values that made them special. Rather than focusing only on financial growth, the program would provide mentorship, technology support, employee development, and practical guidance for small business owners who worked honestly every day but rarely had access to large corporate resources. At the bottom of the letter was one simple request. Claire invited Ethan to become an advisor for the initiative, not because of business credentials or executive experience, but because she believed he understood something far more valuable. He understood people. Ethan quietly smiled before folding the letter with great care. Just then, Lily walked into the office carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate after school. "Who wrote the letter?" she asked with bright curiosity. Ethan handed it to her, and she carefully read every line before looking back at her father. "Are you going to say yes?" Ethan looked around the little garage that had supported their family through difficult years. The walls still displayed faded customer photographs, handwritten thank you notes, and tools worn smooth from countless repairs. "I do not know," he admitted honestly. "I have never advised anyone except people who needed their engines fixed." Lily smiled with the remarkable confidence only children sometimes possess. "Maybe she's not asking you to fix businesses," she said. "Maybe she's asking you to remind people how to be kind." Ethan laughed quietly, surprised by the wisdom hidden inside such simple words. That evening he sat alone on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset spread warm shades of gold across the Montana sky. He thought about everything that had changed without either of them planning it. Claire had arrived, searching for silence, and left carrying hope. He had opened his front door, expecting nothing more than to help a stranger through one difficult night, yet kindness had quietly traveled far beyond the valley. The next morning, Ethan mailed a short handwritten reply. He thanked Claire for her generous invitation and accepted on one condition. Every business they helped would always be treated with the same dignity and respect that any neighbor deserved, regardless of size, profit, or reputation. Days later, when Claire unfolded his letter inside her Chicago office, she smiled with quiet gratitude because she knew the future of her new mission had never depended upon finding the smartest advisor. It had always depended upon finding the kindest one. Late spring arrived with longer days, clear blue skies, and fresh mountain air flowing through the open doors of Ethan's repair garage. The new partnership with Claire's small business initiative had quietly begun, but Ethan insisted that very little change inside the garage itself. Every customer was still welcomed with a handshake. Every repair was explained honestly, and every family that depended on a reliable vehicle was treated with the same patience as before. The only noticeable difference was that several struggling shop owners from neighboring towns occasionally stopped by to learn how Ethan organized his business and earned such remarkable trust within the community. He never delivered speeches or complicated presentations. Instead, he poured fresh coffee, walked them through the garage, and reminded them that people always remembered how they were treated long after they forgot the price they paid. Hundreds of miles away, Claire watched those visits through occasional reports and quiet conversations with the program's regional coordinators. Every story sounded remarkably similar. Businesses were improving, not because someone had handed them extraordinary resources, but because they had rediscovered the value of honesty, consistency, and genuine respect. One Friday afternoon, without any announcement or publicity, a familiar executive sedan turned slowly onto the gravel road leading toward Ethan's farmhouse. There were no television cameras, no corporate photographers, and no convoy of waiting vehicles. Claire stepped out wearing simple jeans, comfortable boots, and a light cream sweater beneath a denim jacket. In her hands, she carefully carried the folded blue knitted blanket that had traveled from Montana to Chicago and back again. Ethan looked up from replacing the brakes on an old pickup truck and smiled, as though only a few days had passed since her last visit. "Welcome back," he said warmly. Claire smiled with quiet gratitude. "I promised I would return this." She gently placed the blue blanket into his hands before looking around the familiar garage. The shelves remained worn but neatly organized. The same handwritten thank you notes still covered one wall. The same peaceful atmosphere greeted every visitor before a single word was spoken. Lily ran across the yard the moment she recognized Claire and wrapped her in an enthusiastic hug. Claire laughed freely, no longer carrying the invisible weight that had followed her during her first visit. They spent the afternoon sharing sandwiches on the farmhouse porch, talking about school projects, new customers, and the small businesses that had already benefited from the nationwide initiative. Claire spoke proudly about family-owned bakeries, repair shops, bookstores, and farms that were hiring more employees because someone had finally believed in them. Ethan listened carefully before quietly asking only one question. "Are the people doing well?" Claire nodded with genuine happiness. "Better than the numbers can ever explain." As the sun drifted lower across the Montana Valley, Claire reached in her travel bag and handed Ethan a simple wooden plaque engraved with only a few words. "Community Advisory Council." "The board approved it yesterday," she explained. "I would like you to serve as our first community advisor. Not because you know the most about business, but because you remind every one of us what business is supposed to serve." Ethan looked at the plaque for a long moment before setting it gently beside the blue blanket. "I will accept," he said softly, "as long as we never forget that every company begins with a family hoping tomorrow will be a little better than today." Claire smiled because she knew that promise would become the quiet foundation beneath everything they built together. And as the evening breeze carried the scent of pine across the porch, the farmhouse no longer felt like the place where two strangers had first met, but like the place where purpose, friendship, and quiet dignity had found a permanent home. 1 year later, the Montana Valley looked much the same, yet the lives connected to it had quietly grown beyond anything Ethan could have imagined on a rainy night when he first opened his front door to a stranger. Wildflowers covered the fields surrounding the farmhouse. The repair garage remained filled with familiar customers, and Lily, now a little taller and a little wiser, proudly helped welcome visitors after school with the same bright smile that had once greeted Claire over a simple breakfast of eggs and coffee. Across the country, hundreds of family-owned businesses had flourished through the community initiative that Claire had built upon the lessons learned in one humble garage. Independent bookstores kept their doors open. Neighborhood bakeries hired new employees. Family farms expanded without losing their identity. And small repair shops discovered that success did not require sacrificing honesty. Every quarterly report praised the remarkable results. But Claire always smiled most when she received handwritten letters from ordinary business owners thanking the program for giving them hope rather than simply offering financial assistance. On a warm Saturday afternoon, the town hosted its annual spring community fair. Children chased balloons across the park. Local musicians filled the air with cheerful country songs, and neighbors gathered beneath white tents sharing homemade pies, fresh lemonade, and stories that grew better with every telling. Ethan had volunteered to repair bicycles for children free of charge, while Lily proudly handed out safety helmets donated through the community program. Claire arrived quietly without any announcement, wearing comfortable jeans, a light blue shirt, and the familiar warmth that no expensive business suit had ever been able to express. Most people recognized her as the successful leader whose company had helped communities across the nation. Yet she greeted every person with the same gentle humility she had learned around Ethan's kitchen table. As the afternoons slowly faded into evening, the three of them walked back toward the farmhouse, overlooking fields glowing beneath the golden light of sunset. They carried leftover pie, laughter from the fair, and the peaceful satisfaction that comes from a day spent helping others without expecting recognition. Ethan spread the blue knitted blanket across the old wooden porch swing, and Lily happily settled between them, while watching fireflies begin to appear above the grass. For several quiet minutes, nobody spoke. The silence itself felt complete. Finally, Claire looked across the valley toward the small garage where a few lights still glowed softly through the open doors. "I used to believe the greatest achievements happened inside tall buildings," she said gently. "Now I know they often begin in places where people simply choose kindness before judgment." Ethan smiled without taking his eyes from the sunset. "Most people spend their lives searching for something bigger," he replied. "Sometimes the better gift is learning to appreciate what is already enough." Lily reached for both of their hands and held them together beneath the blue blanket, completely unaware that her simple gesture captured everything neither adult could easily describe. Claire realized that the greatest title she would ever value was not Chief Executive Officer. Ethan understood that opening one door on one rainy night had quietly changed far more lives than he would ever fully know. As the last light disappeared behind the Montana mountains, the porch, the farmhouse, and the little repair garage stood exactly as they always had, proving that quiet dignity never needed applause, genuine kindness never asked for recognition, and the smallest act of compassion could become the beginning of a story that would continue changing hearts long after the world stopped watching.